The date was June 2025. A Croatian sailing vessel appeared on maritime radar. It was drifting 88 nautical miles west of La Palma on a calm sea with a clear sky above, but something about it didn't feel right. The vessel was not fishing, it was not registered for tourism, and it had no reason to be that far out. The Spanish Maritime Patrol was already watching it from a distance. They had been tracing quiet movements across the Atlantic Naval corridor for weeks, so when this sailboat showed up where it shouldn't, they decided to intercept it. When the patrol officers went up close, the vessel looked clean, almost ordinary, but 3 men were on board who were clearly nervous and on edge, so the customs agents decided to search the vessel. To their surprise, they found hundreds of sealed bricks below deck. They were packed tight beneath floor panels and compartments. Let us just correct that, these were not just sealed bricks, these were bricks of cocaine. They had just found 1,078 pounds of high purity cocaine. This was the first strike in what would be known as Operation Black Shadow. The network behind this drug trafficking had been operating for years. It had been sending tons of high purity cocaine across the Atlantic without setting off alarms. But this time, they pushed their luck. You see, the cocaine began its journey near Brazil, loaded onto motherships. These vessels were massive floating stockpiles. From there, smaller sailboats and speedboats were dispatched like shuttles, which would meet the motherships mid-ocean and relay packages toward Europe. Some transfers happened hundreds of kilometers offshore, beyond the reach of any coast guard. The route was so well used that investigators started calling it the narco-superhighway. But what made this network different was its creativity. The crew used to use an actual shipwreck as a floating fuel depot. It was the Telamon from the 1980s, which had turned into a criminal pit stop. So a few weeks ago, 11 boats, dozens of handlers, and nearly 4 tons of cocaine was set to move through the archipelago without detection. But one grounded boat off Gran Canaria messed up their whole operation. Investigators noticed a pattern. It matched a case from 2020 where a boat with some mechanical failure and a ton of cocaine was found. The same things happened in January and March of this year. Spanish National Police flagged the incident and looped in their counterparts at the Guardia Civil. From there, Europol was contacted and the UK's National Crime Agency also joined in. Together, they decided to begin a full-scale operation. The amount of illegal cargo was too large and the locations were too well chosen, so they needed to intervene. And so, Operation Black Shadow was greenlit to bust a hidden logistics chain stretching from South America to Europe. Not only that, it was the takedown of one of the most carefully planned drug corridors in the Atlantic. Now, what made this operation so hard to track was its fluidity. The narcos used to change routes, dump their boats, and even the crew rotated. Communications are layered with satellite terminals and coded jargon. Even if you intercepted one shipment, the rest of the system just rewired itself. By the time European authorities would identify a single delivery route, another 2 would already have been tested off the map. And this brings us back to the Canary Islands. Sitting just 100 km off the West African coast, these volcanic shores have quietly become a launch pad for Europe's drug supply. There are plenty of small ports, warehouses and back roads here. It was the perfect pressure valve for tons of coke moving into Spain, then onward through France, Germany and the UK. But this crew got too comfortable, because while the mother boat was drifting near La Palma, another vessel ran into trouble. And that's when the Operation Black Shadow began. It happened just off the coast of Gran Canaria in January. 2 sailboats were seen drifting close to the rocks near Tasate. They were grounded and there was no movement on board. From a distance, it looked like a simple case of mechanical failure, maybe a navigation error, maybe bad weather. But these were not tourist vessels, because the patrol received no distress calls. What raised their suspicion even more was that the boats had no recent registration check-ins and no activity recorded on the maritime traffic system. They hadn't docked at any known port, hadn't refueled at any local station, and hadn't logged their coordinates for days. It was like the boats had been ghosting the radar and trying to stay off the map. That's not how regular boats behave, especially in busy waters like these. So when the patrol approached, they treated the boats like a crime scene. And they were right. In the boats, there was no visible crew, but the cabins were not empty. Inside, officers uncovered over 1,082 kilograms of cocaine. It was a ton of high-grade product packed for delivery. The street value was easily €60 million. Then again in March, the authorities found another speedboat with 2,600 kilos of cocaine off the coast of Tenerife. Apparently, the crew had abandoned the boat after it stopped mid-water due to some mechanical failure. When the investigators studied these abandoned boats, something clicked, because this was not the first time. Back in 2020, another boat with the same setup had been stopped under similar circumstances. Clearly, it was a practice pattern that was finally starting to show its cracks. This new case forced them to pull out the old files, and that's when they started to connect the dots. Same offshore drop points, same communication blackouts, same fast boats arriving days later. It was the tip of a trafficking superhighway that had been running undisturbed for years. The moment that sailboat touched sand, Operation Black Shadow began. You see, that sailboat contained 1 ton of cocaine. It was not some amateur work. This was the kind of shipment that only happens when multiple crime syndicates agree to operate together. And when something that big goes adrift, you bet every agency on both sides of the Atlantic starts investigating. Spanish authorities didn't sit on it. The cocaine was traced back to the West African loading zone, which is a known hotspot for transatlantic narco routes. The crew, which was arrested back in 2020, consisted of 3 Croatian nationals, so Europol was looped in. They wanted to uncover where the cocaine came from, and also who built the pipeline. Spain sent intel, the UK's National Crime Agency offered tech support and financial tracing units, the DEA flagged similar patterns in encrypted phone usage, Portugal shared surveillance logs, and France, Belgium and the Netherlands backed it all up with maritime traffic records and human intelligence from past seizures. The Joint Task Force got to work. It was coordinated through the Maritime Analysis and Operations Center Narcotics. Over 14 countries were now involved. Operation Black Shadow, as it was named, became one of the largest narco-focused collaborations in Europe this year. The team pulled satellite feeds, they compared vessel movement patterns across a 3-year window. They also tracked motherships from Brazil and Colombia to midway points in the Atlantic. And then came the weird part. They found out about the Telamon shipwreck off Lanzarote. They realized that it had become a functional refueling station for the drug traffickers. The traffickers had been storing drums of fuel inside it and using it as a pit stop in plain sight. Investigators started to piece together a trafficking constellation. Front companies across Spain, encrypted satellite terminals traced to luxury apartments, boats that had changed names 3 times in 5 months, and local distribution rings embedded deep in Canarian marinas. And that grounded sailboat was the thread that finally started to pull the whole thing loose. It was finally time to bust one of the biggest drug operations of this year. On June 3rd, 2025, the calm across the Canary Islands was shattered by one of the most aggressive anti-narcotics raids Spain has executed in recent memory. It was the final act of Operation Black Shadow. It was months in the making, and this was no ordinary drug bust. 500 police officers moved simultaneously to 29 locations spread across Lanzarote, Gran Canaria, and Fuerteventura. The operation included armed and masked officers of Spain's Policia Nacional, who were backed by Europol and coordinated with the UK's National Crime Agency. They kicked down doors, stormed villas, and entered locked storage yards. The goal was to decapitate the entire chain. By morning, 48 people were in custody. 47 were Spanish nationals, but one was a British man arrested in Lanzarote. His name has not been made public, but that didn't stop UK headlines from targeting him. British media described him as the sole non-Spaniard involved in a huge cocaine network. They turned what was a Spanish-led operation into a story of British relevance. Meanwhile, the Spanish media treated him as just another piece of the puzzle. There were no front pages about a British fixer, just drone shots of masked officers storming homes and warehouses. But for British law enforcement, the arrest was enough to trigger serious interest. A UK link meant jurisdictional cooperation, intelligence sharing, and likely further investigation on home soil. The fallout had only just begun, because the amount of evidence seized is just too much to abandon this operation after one drug bust. The thing is, the officers targeted garages, warehouses, and even isolated coastal properties where modified speedboats, jet skis, and marine radios were found. A total of 69 vehicles were seized, which included 19 narco boats. Many of them were equipped with long-range fuel tanks and disguised identification numbers. They also found €100,000 worth of drugs mid-packaging, 3 handguns, encrypted phones, and satellite equipment. Much of the gear had been purchased using shell bank accounts and fake invoices, but these banks have now been frozen by authorities. On top of that, they also seized 6 properties and multiple bank accounts as evidence of laundering. In Lanzarote alone, 14 separate raids were carried out in a single morning. 20 people were arrested on the island. They included high-ranking operatives believed to be running day-to-day logistics. Some were caught asleep. Others tried to flee but were unsuccessful to do so. Thankfully, the major operators of the network were caught, because just look at the numbers. In total, nearly 4 tons of cocaine were intercepted during Operation Black Shadow. That's over 8.8 million individual doses, which is enough to flood Europe's streets for weeks. So why here? Why now? Simple. The Atlantic route is the new favorite. As pressure ramps up in the Caribbean and US corridors, South American cartels, mainly Colombian and Brazilian, load their product onto motherships off the coasts of Suriname and Venezuela, then push into deep Atlantic waters, completely out of radar coverage. Before Operation Black Shadow, the network worked for years, but this time, they slipped. 2 grounded boats led to a chain reaction that exposed just how wide and deep the network had grown. These arrests at the beginning of June were just the start. Within days of the Operation Black Shadow raids, Spain's National Court took over. Judge Maria Tardon presided as 26 of the 48 arrested suspects were brought before the court between June 9 and 10. The suspects came from across the Canary Islands. 16 were from Lanzarote, 8 from Gran Canaria, and 2 were from Fuerteventura. Their court appearances happened via video conference, and most of them refused to answer police questions. Judge Tardon ordered provisional detention for 17 of them and cited the severity of the charges and the risk of flight or obstruction. The rest were either released under conditions or held with limited information released to the public. They are charged with international drug trafficking, membership in a criminal organization, and likely money laundering. Each can carry up to 20 years. Prosecutors are now analyzing mountains of digital evidence from seized phones, GPS devices, and encrypted communication tools. The case is also a political priority, which is why Eurojust could also step in to coordinate a multinational prosecution. Until then, the 48 suspects are waiting, scattered across high security facilities in mainland Spain, as the court prepares its next move.